Order. Let the minutes show that 3 out of the 4 board members, voting board members, are present, and UCD is here. Mabel, welcome. We are glad to have you with us. So let's have the Pledge of Allegiance. Mr. Deemer, would you lead us in the pledge?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Any changes to the agenda? Seeing none, any comment from the public on items not on the agenda? Welcome, Mr. Baxter. It's like old times seeing you out in the audience. All right. We have a consent agenda before us. Any members of the council wishing to withdraw any of the consent items?
Motion to approve consent.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve consent. Any public comment? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries unanimously. Update on the project. Mr. Deemer.
Yes, Director Marble and board members, brief update on the project. Things continue to go well. We're very busy these days with completing construction and starting up the operations. So the topics I'll cover this afternoon are on this slide. We'll touch briefly on the funding and the financing, and then we give you a construction update, tell you a little bit about the acceptance test and how that's going, and then upcoming activities. So on the financing, we continue to process and receive SRF funding. For the Woodland loan, we've received $81 million, or 73% of the loan total. And for Davis's loan, about a similar percentage, 72%, or $68.5 million received to date. On the grants, as we've reported before, we've received commitments for $40.2 million in grant funding. On the state side, we are trying to finalize the grant agreement with the Department of Fish and Wildlife. That's the last increment of grant funding we got from the state, the $8.1 million. That was a Prop 1 award back in January. So we're working through, hopefully, what will be the final details of the actual grant agreement, and that money will then be made available. For the joint intake project, construction is continuing. All of the major pumping and piping and gear, electrical gear is installed. The one remaining work item that is somewhat in flux is the installation of permanent PG&E power. They had some issues with the design and the protective gear that PG&E wanted to see installed to protect their broader system. So they're working through that, and currently the date for installation of permanent power is June 17th. Once they have the permanent power, then they'll be able to move into the testing of the pumps and the equipment and move toward completion of that project. The other thing that I wanted to bring to the board's attention is that the agency, in partnership with RD 2035, has retained special counsel, 2 different counsels, to help us with a property tax assessment from the Yolo County on the new joint intake structure. You know, in our view, it looks like it's a lot more than it should be. So we're working with special counsel to make sure that whatever the assessment is on the new joint intake is appropriate and legally authorized. The other counsel that's been retained is for a dispute with Balfour Beatty, the contractor at the joint intake. There was a dispute on the installation of the coffer dam, hard driving of the piles, that resulted in significant extra work on the contractor's part. They've submitted a claim. RD 2035, in consultation with the agency, has rejected that claim, and so we're having a construction expert, special counsel, help us further evaluate that and advise us as to next steps. This is a photo of the joint intake. This is as you can see, the building, except for the top parapet, is essentially complete. The pumps, as I mentioned, have been installed inside of the facility. This is actually it's not a very good photo, but in the back here where this worker is the main canal for Conaway Ranch. It's just on the west side of the levee, west of the river. This is where we've installed our temporary pumps, and these are the pumps that are now providing the water to the wastewater, to the new water treatment plant as we go through testing and startup.
Can I ask a question on that?
Yeah.
So that water's coming out of the old pump now. At this point, is there
So,
any coming out of the new side?
Exactly. It's the existing intake pumps the water just over the levee
Right.
to the head end of their Conaway Canal, and that's where we've
That's where we're
inserted
pulling
the
out.
temporary pumps and connected the temporary pumps to the raw water line, and then that takes it the 4.5 miles to the treatment plant.
Great, thank you.
In terms of the water treatment plant, CH2M Hill achieved substantial completion on May 12th. They are currently reconstructing County Road 24, and they're really down to landscaping, fencing, and punch list items. Through the end of April, the construction is 97.4% complete, and billings of $142 million have been submitted. This is a recent aerial photo of the treatment plant. You know, in previous photos, you would have seen a lot of construction trailers on the west side of the site. Those have all been removed. All of the paving has been completed, and as I said, they're in the process of installing fencing and lighting and landscaping. This is just a view of the exterior of their maintenance building. This is a photo showing the installation of the granular activated carbon material on the filters. A photo of the treated water storage tank and the recently completed paving around those tanks. This is a photo of the inside of the finished water pump station. This is the station, the pumps that will deliver water to both Woodland and Davis. This is the sludge drying beds and the recently completed decant structures at the drying beds, so they'll be able to, once the solids are produced, they'll be able to properly dispose of them and process them. In terms of off-site pipeline construction, the installation roadway restoration is complete. The pipelines that deliver the water to Woodland and Davis have been disinfected. The Davis metering station, which is the handoff point from the Regional Water Authority's responsibility to the City of Davis's distribution system, is nearly complete. And as I mentioned, the raw water pipeline is currently sending water to the treatment plant for startup and testing. This is a picture of the Davis metering facility. This is across from the photovoltaic site on County Road 102, Pole Line Road. So we'll talk just a minute about acceptance, testing, and startup. This is really the focus the last couple of weeks and will be for the next several. The contractor completed the 24-hour hydraulic test in April. They successfully tested the ozone system in March, and raw water deliveries to the treatment plant began on May 12th, so last Thursday. And the pre-acceptance testing activities are currently underway. So this is a diagram of how the water is moving through the plant. The raw water comes, west is over here, north is at the bottom right. The raw water enters here, goes through what is called the flash mix station. From there it goes through the sand ballasted clarifiers, a gravity settling process, then through the ozone treatment, and then through the filters, the granular activated carbon filters, into these two storage tanks, and then to the finished water pump station, which delivers the water to Woodland and Davis. The treatment plant is processing and treating Sacramento River water. This is a photo of the filter with the processed water in the filters. This is a photo of the gravity thickeners, which is thickening the solids that are removed from the process being tested. And this is the schedule that I wanted to just spend a minute on and make sure the board understands what's happening here in the next couple of weeks. As I mentioned, the treatment plant started up on May 12th. We're in what we call the pre-acceptance test period. That's where CH2M Hill will put the plant through its various paces. They'll ramp it up to the full 30 MGD here in the next week or so. And then on May 26th, the official acceptance test will start. And that acceptance test will run from May 26th to June 9th. And you can see the amount of water that the plant will be produced in the dark blue line during that period of time, peaking at 30 million gallons a day, about in the middle of that acceptance test. And the other important thing to note is that June 1st, plus or minus, but right now it's scheduled for June 1st, deliveries will start to the two cities. So the green line and the red line are the flows to Woodland and Davis respectively, and it'll ramp up very slowly. So it'll start out around 4 million gallons a day, 3-4 million gallons a day, and by the end of the acceptance test, it'll be around 5 or 6 million gallons per day being delivered to each city. Once they pass the acceptance test, scheduled for June 9th, the operations period of the CH2M Hill contract will start, and then the cities will be in a position to order additional water, additional surface water as their needs dictate. So any questions on the acceptance test and next few weeks?
Yeah, a quick question on the amount of water available, because we're using that separate intake. Do we have a volume of 30
Yes.
MGD?
Yes.
Okay.
So, very good
I mean,
question.
for an ongoing, like if, June 9th is just, 100 degrees and we got, a ton of water need during that time, do we have the ability to actually run up?
What we have right now at the intake is capacity to deliver 30 million gallons a day of raw water to the treatment plant with the temporary pumps. That's going to allow CH2M Hill to fully test the treatment plant at its maximum capacity, its design capacity. Once they pass the acceptance test, the plan is to remove some of the temporary pumps. I think we have 6 or 7 pumps? 7 pumps out there now. So we would remove about half of the capacity once they pass the acceptance test, because they're very expensive to run. We would be able to produce up to 15 million gallons per day until the new joint intake is finished, which is currently scheduled for August 2nd, August 3rd, at which point we could go back up to the full 30.
Okay. And that's kind of in line with ramping up the communities to accept the water
Right.
as well, I'm assuming.
Right. I think, the advice of our experts that we've consulted in terms of introducing the surface water, obviously to monitor certain constituents, to flush the lines, but also to ramp up slowly so that the two waters can stabilize. So upcoming activities and milestones, we're definitely in the project closeout phase here. We got to receive all of the record drawings and documentation and complete the punch list. We need to cancel all of the permits that were issued and necessary for the construction activities. And then the project dedication ceremony. And at your places, we have a save the date flyer that'll be emailed out tomorrow, and start planning for our event on July 28th at 10:30. Milestones, I've covered these, but the plan is to begin the initial water deliveries to the cities about June 1st, and the operations period, assuming that CH2M Hill successfully completes their testing, will begin on June 9th. And the joint intake is scheduled to be completed and ready to be put in service, delivering water to the agency on August 3rd. Finally, this is the cost slide that you've seen previously. The numbers haven't changed, but as part of our budget preparation that we're going through right now. When we come back to the board in June, we'll provide you with an update on these numbers and any changes in the costs that are shown here. Any questions?
Okay, go ahead, Brent.
So on the dedication ceremony, I understand that you're not going to be around, Bill. Is that
I
true?
won't.
So, is there a possibility to conference you in somehow, or have you there virtually?
I don't know that.
Okay.
We're in a little more remote part of the country. If we were in Lima, that would probably be doable, but it may not be where we're at.
Okay.
I think what
Or
we'll
perhaps we
certainly-
can record some comments or something from Bill before he leaves, so that he might
That's
be
been
able to.
done.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's the
Yeah.
plan. We had an interview with Bill, a video interview, and so we'll prepare that for presentation at the ceremony. And certainly, Bill, if you're able to join us live, we'll make the arrangements to do that as well.
Thank you.
And then this came up from a constituent not too long ago about the notion of cost savings on the project. I think the project is sort of on budget. And the way the constituent asked the question, so the project is on budget, but because of the fact that we both communities receive state revolving funds, the actual cost to the city over the payment period is actually reduced. I think that might be a helpful thing for both communities to know more about. So the price tag, should we have paid for it in cash right up front, it has stayed the same, but the cost to the communities has actually come down because of the much lower interest rate that we're paying as compared to what we potentially anticipated. So that might be a helpful thing to have handy.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Director Lee. Early on back in 2011, the total project cost estimate was $350 million at one point. But, through looking at the capacity that we really needed, it was 40 million gallons per day capacity back then. The cities took a hard look at that and decided that 30 was a more appropriate number. And other cost savings in the design of the facilities, we were able to lower that. Of course, we got very favorable bids from CH2M Hill compared to what our estimate was. So there was a series of things that happened between 2014 and when we actually signed the contract with CH2M Hill to bring the cost down. But you're right, and since the contract has been awarded, the primary savings that is being passed on to the ratepayers is the savings that are being achieved with low interest loans and grants.
And this will come up on the budget, but I might as well ask now. I can't remember after how many years the Conway Preservation Group water actually sort of becomes ours. What is the time frame?
24, 25 years.
Okay. Yeah, I knew there was some period, and I know we pay for a while, and then it actually becomes
Right.
our actual owned right. So thank you.
Clarify that. Our understanding is the water is actually already
Yeah,
ours. The
we own it.
payments
We're
will
just paying for
continue,
it, but we own it. We have the water right.
we own the
perfected
permanent
that
water
right.
rights.
Right. I maybe I didn't ask correctly. At some point, our payments cease.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
24 years. Okay. Thank you.
We own the water
Our
right, we're still
mortgage.
paying the mortgage. Yeah, exactly.
Then we burn the mortgage. Which is certainly another point that we emphasized at the start of the project, which, as you indicated, cost needed to be emphasized. That also needs to be emphasized because we will own that in perpetuity, and that's not a small thing in the state of California.
Right.
All right. We have next consideration of approval of this contract change order. Richard, are you doing that?
Yes, Chair Marble. Dennis asked me to cover this item. Staff is proposing and recommending board approval of change order number 17, and this change order would resolve 2 construction claim disputes with CH2M Hill, and significantly in the life of this 3-year construction project. These are really the only 2 significant contested claims we've had. They both have to do with road improvements, One of the challenges with Road 103, the county encroachment permit required certain restoration standards. Assumptions were made by the contractor about the subsurface condition to be expected under that road, and certain stretches of the road were very soft that required the contractor to dig out and bring in new material that was not expected or planned. And we had provided some baseline information about what to expect, but didn't really provide any disclosure that they would expect conditions like that. So that was a fairly good claim for CH2M Hill on that unexpected conditions. And then the other one was a contract ambiguity question about the scope of the restoration requirement on County Road 24. County Road 24 is the existing county road that accesses both your new treatment plant as well as the City of Woodland wastewater treatment plant, and its current road condition, pre-project road condition rather, was pretty small, minor rural road, and we're requiring that road to be substantially reconstructed to higher standards. And there were some ambiguities in the contract about the scope of that. CH2M Hill convinced us that their reading of it, their fair reading of it, they assumed a certain level of reconstruction, and we required something up here. Both of these claims we're resolving and recommending the $500,000 payment, which we think is very fair and reasonable given the scope of the two claims and the uncertainty of how the agency might ultimately prevail on those. The initial CH2M Hill demand on both of the claims substantially exceeded $500,000. So we think that's a fair resolution, and we think CH2M Hill made a fair presentation of these are legitimate unanticipated costs that they had to incur. So staff would recommend board approval of that change order to confirm these two road restoration claim, conclude those two claims.
Questions? I'll move the item then.
I'll second.
Any comments from the public? All those in favor of approving this contract change order number 17 signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions?
And I might
Motion
just add one additional point. In addition to the payment of $500,000, the change order also calls for the agency to release half of the retention.
Mm-hmm.
So, at this point in the project, we feel very comfortable with releasing, half of the retention and still retaining about 5% of the original contract price. But it does result in some interest savings to CH2M Hill. And so we were able to lower the $500,000 price by agreeing to also release the retention.
All right. Budget.
Okay, so I have just a few slides to walk the board through quickly if I can figure out how to do that, Leanne. Do I need to hit the... Is it on the...
I think hit escape.
Yeah. There we go. Where do I go? There we go. Okay. So in your packets, you have some very detailed exhibits that display all of the costs that we're recommending for the FY17 budget. You'll see that we have some relatively small amount of capital costs budgeted as we close out the capital project and pay off the remaining construction cost work. But the major focus as we shift into FY17 is transitioning to a fully operational budget. Where? Is it? On the bottom? All right. So as Paul gets me into slideshow. Okay. This is a summary of the budget. So as I mentioned, $12 million of the remaining construction project budget to be paid. The operating budget is $19.77 million, and that includes both the CPG water payment that Director Lee mentioned earlier, There we go. Thank you. As well as the debt service payment, and I'll show you that in a minute. So the total budget, both operating and capital, is $31.8 million. The major categories under the capital budget are the joint intake construction. We still owe our share of the joint intake construction cost, and the design, build, operate, design and construction of the regional facilities. For the operating and debt service, there's three major components. The supplemental water purchase, which is $2.6 million. That's Woodland and Davis's contribution combined. The operation and maintenance budget, which is primarily CH2M Hill paying for the staffing and the chemicals and the production of water, is $8 million. And then debt service and revenue payments, $9 million. And again, that's combined Woodland and Davis. Under the capital budget, we have some remaining capital, remaining environmental permits that we need to close out, shown here. I mentioned the joint intake construction. That's the agency's remaining share of that project construction cost, the $3.58 million. And then the design, build, operate, CH2M Hill. And the big portion of that $7.455 million is the release of the other 5% of the retention, or the release of the other $7.3 million. We have some continued modest construction oversight, legal and technical project closeout. We have agency administration of $109,000. That's primarily focused on the joint intake. It's the coordination and the overall management and coordination with RD 2035 on the joint intake. And then the special counsel that I mentioned for the property tax assessment and the cofferdam claim dispute. We've got a contingency of $336,000 and program management $226,000, and that is primarily services from West Yost that are being provided to the agency to process the SRF payments and all of the documentation that goes along with that. Switching now to the operating budget, I mentioned the supplemental water purchase, or the CPG water, or the summer water that it's being called, $2.6 million. The O&M budget is the agency administration, general manager, secretary, legal, treasury, accounting, public outreach, etc. O&M oversight. So this first year in particular, we'll have to establish a new norm. We've taken our best estimate in terms of what the various O&M oversight activities are. We're going to need to coordinate with RD 2035 from an operational standpoint on the operation of the intake once that's completed in August. There are reconciliations that are built into the contract, electricity, for example. The agency pays electricity, but if CH2M Hill underutilize or uses less energy, there's a savings sharing that goes on. If they use more, then there's a penalty. Annual water use projections. You know, we'll have to continue to work with the cities to project the water and then deliver the water on the schedule that the cities need. The significant portion of the budget is the operation and maintenance costs. This is the costs that are paid to CH2M Hill for the staffing and the chemicals and the production of water at the plant, the maintenance. Some permits that need to be in effect and reported under for the water rights and the annual coordination and reporting. We have a permit to operate and a water right fees that go along with those permits. And a fairly significant portion of the cost this year is the temporary pumping and fuel costs of the joint intake, the manning and the rental and the fuel for those temporary pumps. When we issued the change order, we estimated 82 days of operation, and that's in essence what this estimate here is based on. We also have an operation contingency of $333,000. And then finally, the debt service and reserve payments. This is detailed in your attachments to your staff report, but each year Woodland has to put aside $664,000 for the first 10 years, and that represents 1 year's SRF payment, and under their loan conditions, they have 10 years to build up that reserve. Woodland has also, the principal and interest payments will be $4.3 million next year, and Davis/USD will have to put up a 4 years payment right away when the project is complete, so they'll need to set aside $4.1 million in reserve, and their principal and interest payments don't start until 1 year after operation, so not until FY18. So just a final point on the reserve payment, this is money that is just being set aside, but it's money that is not being spent, and once the loan is paid off, that money goes back to the two cities.
And, Dennis, could we just clarify, so that's specifically the debt reserve payment requirement of the SRF funding, separate from any reserve or operating reserve that will be built into the budget for agency operations?
And finally, this is just a summary of where the agency is hoping the money will come from. The City of Woodland, City of Davis, and UC Davis. And we've prepared detailed sheets for the cities to further break down these costs and where they're coming from. And so the next step would be to bring back a final budget after it's been scrubbed by the cities, and we make sure that everything, as we've presented here today, is accurate and appropriate. And then at the same time, there will be some consultant contracts similar to past years, only a lot less dollars this time, to support the various O&M activities.
Just real quick, so this is the $31 million. So one of the items that we discussed is that specifically the payments of $2.6 million for the summer water purchase are actually debt obligations of the respective cities, and I think both cities have that included in the budget, and those payments will likely be made directly by the cities. So all other things equal, the formal action that will come back to the board at your next meeting will look like this budget less the summer water purchase, because those payments will not be flowing through the agency.
So thanks for that clarification, Paul. That's the kind of confirmation and explanation that we'll make sure to provide at the next board meeting. But Paul's absolutely right. This includes the summer water that we're not paying for it. The cities are paying for it, but it is part of the city's overall expense associated with the project.
And it has been reflected consistently in the overall project budgets, so it's been out there, but in terms of actually making the payments, they'll not obligations of the agency.
And that's all I have. Any questions?
All right. Any questions on the budget or input, council, from the board here? Any public comment on the budget? All right. We don't need any action on this item, I don't believe. So on to the long-range calendar.
So the long-range calendar looks, obviously next month will be an important meeting where we ask the board to approve the budget and the associated consultant contracts that I just mentioned. Beyond that, assuming things continue to go well, we really don't anticipate an absolute need for board meetings during the summer period. We do have an outstanding activity associated with the City of Woodlands converting their promissory notes for the CPG water by Deutsche Bank, similar to what Davis has already accomplished. So we'll have to work with the City of Woodland and with Paul for the timing of that. There are some board approvals that'll be necessary when that's ready to be approved. But other than that, like I say, if things continue to go well, we likely would not need a board meeting during the summer months.
Okay. I see nobody wishing to make a comment.
Bill, could I just have a follow-up question on that for the board? As you guys know, the Brown Act requires local government agency governing boards to establish regular meeting dates, and we did that years ago when the agency was formed, established monthly regular meeting time, and query whether or not in the June meeting
I
the board
think
would
we
like
actually established quarterly meetings, and then we had to revert to monthly
with the
because we had so
exception of
many
August.
special meetings going
Yeah,
on.
and the question is whether or not you want to perhaps have an agenda item in June to revert to quarterly meetings, and we can always call a special meeting as needed, but right now the regular meeting schedule we've got publicly posted is not realistic, and we're not expected to do that. So I just thought that might be a kind of a good government thing to do, to shift to quarterly meetings.
I would agree.
Yeah, then we'll put that on the June agenda as well.
Yeah, and to that point, I think we have basically in building our budget, assumed quarterly meetings would be sufficient. I really think that once we're in the full operations period, quarterly will be more than sufficient for the board to meet.
Okay. Do we have any correspondence that needs to come forward? TAC comments? Technical Advisory Committee, any comments?
Yeah, I would like to point out that now that the surface water is coming into the treatment plant and being treated, it is being placed into the north storm pond that belongs to the city, and then it's being pumped from there back into the Conaway's ditch at the top of their property. We're keeping track of every gallon that's being pumped into that pond, and we'll do a gallon-for-gallon transfer back into Conaway's property, so there'll be no water loss or water waste through this process. It sure is nice to see water coming out of that plant, though. It's really fun. So if you get a chance, drive out there and take a look. It's really worth it. Thank you.
All right. Seeing no other comments from staff, any board member comments?
So one thing that's come up in my community outreach is that people are curious about the nature of the conjunctive use in terms of, gee, what % of my water will be coming from the plant versus the existing intermediate and deep aquifer wells in Davis. So this is just a comment for Davis City staff, but it probably in conjunction with you, Dennis. It would be nice if there were a website, either on the city's website or on the Clean Water Agency's website, which showed the flow of the water through the various systems. And on the Davis side of things, what % of that water is coming from the clean water, the regional water treatment facility versus from our existing wells. Because what I have told most people is that the lion's share of the water will be coming from the regional water treatment facility, but that's not universally true. As we switch from wintertime water to perhaps summertime water, or on an extremely heavy flow day, perhaps July 4th when everyone's doing some outdoor watery activities, I think we probably do have the technology to at least have a somewhat reasonable estimate of that. So you don't have to answer if you don't want to, but that would be, I think, helpful to the constituents, at least in Davis, because of the nature of the water system.
Yeah, just one clarifying comment. We certainly can do that. Estimating it is fine. I think we can update it, not in real time, but certainly on a monthly basis, or maybe even better than that, if that's what the Davis City Council would like. We will have the data to do so, and people will be able to see. We have had community meetings with staff to prepare them for the surface water, and have been clear. During the peak summer months, Davis's long-term water plan includes a combination of groundwater and surface water, and while we're doing our best cost-effectively to blend it as uniformly as we can, we've been clear from the beginning it won't be the exact same mix of water depending where in the city you are, but you will get a blend of surface and well water during the peak summer. So we'll work to get that on our website. If we get it set up, it may be something we can coordinate with the agency if they care to share it on their website as well. But
Okay.
that would be a Davis-specific situation.
Sure. Thank you.
If I could tag on to that, I've actually had the same question by more than one constituent as well, and I think it's a great idea to show the general blend, not having to be with specifics, but just generally, this is how much well water and this is how much surface water we're using just on our websites would be really, really helpful to our folks.
Thanks for bringing that up. Any other comments? Seeing none, we're adjourned. Thank you.